Welcome to E-commerce with Coffee, a podcast powered by Amber Engine, where we share e-com secrets for brands over your favorite brew. We start with the caffeine and then leap enthusiastically into behind-the-scenes e-com insights that led to the success of our guests. I'm Nate Svoboda, and I'm about to serve you up the best. Let's get started. Welcome to this episode of E-commerce with Coffee. Today we're speaking to Steve Dinelli, the Chief Digital Officer at Barrington Media Group and former founder, co-founder of the Blackbird Garage Digital Agency. So really excited to talk to you today about DTC brands, customer acquisition, and your career over the last few years. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to be on and talk about direct to consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, before we really dive in, would love if you could chat to us about, the early days of Blackbird Garage, right? When you started working with DTC brands. What inspired you to work with these types of organizations specifically?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of a funny story because I fell into it. I never set out to do this. Give you a little background. Before Blackbird, I had a mobile app in the food delivery space. And for that business, I was running my own Facebook, Google ads, things like that. And I was working in a co-working space in Chicago. And I had a bunch of friends who had other companies who started asking for help because they saw I was being successful with paid customer acquisition. From there, it kind of snowballed. And I got really lucky. In 2014, I think I was posting about paid social on Reddit. And I got this inbox message. And it said like, hey, I have this, company, we're trying to scale paid social. Could you take a look at it? I was still working on the side. And I said, yeah, I'll take a look. The short version of that is it ended up being the founder of a brand called Movement Watches, which became a very successful direct-to-consumer brand. And at the time, it was just the founder, Jake, and his business partner, Kramer, working out of their apartment. They didn't really have anything. And had a really successful Q4 with them in 2014, decided to dive full time into running social search campaigns. And word kind of spread that I was helpful with Movement and started getting contacted by other D2C brands, and it just kept snowballing. So never intended to be doing this. It just kind of happened.
It's interesting how many people I speak to that they have a similar kind of path, right? They start doing this on the side, and then, the demand builds and it quickly snowballs into, well, might as well start an agency and do this for real. Would be curious though. I mean, you started the agency, what was it, 2015?
Yeah, so officially after that Q4 that I just mentioned, I think February of 2015, I actually established the LLC and got it going.
So my understanding, you worked primarily with DTC brands, right? What are some of the biggest changes you've seen in the DTC space since 2015 to now?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's changed a lot. 2015 was really what I consider the early days of it. Shopify was really just picking up then. When you think back to what brands existed then, you think about brands like Warby Parker, Dollar Shave Club, Bonobos. Some of these more what we would consider now as like legacy players in direct to consumer, but they were all still very early. I'd say the biggest changes is the barrier to entry. I read about like teenagers now who have really successful Shopify stores, like really, really successful. I think anyone, as long as you have access to a computer, whether that's your own library, school, whatever, you can get on Alibaba, contact a supplier, and get something made. You can launch a Shopify store with a 30-day free trial. You can start running Facebook ads at $5 a day. Literally, it's so easy to start a company now that it's increased competition dramatically. Before you had to have, a bunch of, resources and money and platforms and all these different things to get going. But now, as long as you have those couple of things that I mentioned, you can do it. It creates more competition, both in products and categories. Also in ad buying, it becomes more competitive, and basically it just makes it a lot harder. So I've seen things over the last 5 or 6 years become progressively harder for direct-to-consumer brands.
I'll bet the number of DTC brands that you've seen has spiked significantly since the beginning of COVID, right? I personally, what I've experienced, right? People are having these ideas and deciding to leave their jobs and take the plunge and start that business. So I don't know, is that something that you've been seeing? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. I've met so many people along the way who have either worked at some of our clients or been a vendor to them or somehow been kind of attached. And I think they see the success that some of these companies have. And it seems very tangible that they can do it on their own and they feel inspired to try and go and launch their own. And it's really fantastic seeing kind of the spider web of how different companies have formed like tangentially from other ones.
Yeah. Well, really excited to talk a little bit more about, obviously now you're the chief digital officer at Barrington, but before we talk about some more present day stuff, you are a busy guy. I imagine that caffeine has got to play some type of role in your life. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely.
So what do you, I know you're drinking something right now. What's your poison that you pick?
My poison of choice is a black currant tea. It's highly caffeinated. I don't actually drink coffee. I don't know if I've ever actually tried it. I was always worried like, oh, I'll become one of those guys who's addicted to coffee. So I'll drink tea instead.
So I'll just become one of those guys addicted to tea instead.
Yeah, I found out later that tea actually has more caffeine, and I'm very, very addicted to this stuff. So if you haven't had black currant tea, I highly recommend it.
No, I haven't, but I am a tea guy, so I'll have to put that on my list. So, Steve, since Barrington acquired Blackbird back about a year ago, right? I think that's about the timeline. So early 2020, mid 2020. What is the biggest change in your day-to-day been? Yeah. And maybe a little bit of overview on, what prompted the acquisition.
Sure. So what prompted the acquisition is my business partner, Nick Kellermeyer, and we were growing Blackbird really successfully. We've worked with a number of great clients over the years, and we kind of got to this crossroad where we said, we can either go the route to try and, layer more services, build out more departments. We were getting kind of to the point where we needed additional infrastructure, whether that's HR or sales teams or just other business operations. And we said we could either try and build all that out on our own, or we could partner with someone. And we kind of set out on this mission to find a partner who maybe had some of those resources that we needed. And by way of running through that process, we actually came across Barrington Media Group. They're a traditional media direct response agency, so TV, radio, direct mail, very similar parallels to what we do, just in completely different channels. They were about 100 people at the time, I think, of the acquisition. And with that came resources like finance, like HR, like, all these parts of the business that would have been difficult to build out, and got to know the founders really well. They're backed by a private equity firm out of Boston called 4 Point Capital, and decided that it was the right time to actually do an acquisition and work with them to grow the combined business. So that's a little bit about the background of how it got there. But how has my day changed? It's changed a lot. Being in a much bigger company, there's a lot more meetings. There's a lot more infrastructure that comes with that.
A little more red tape.
A little bit, but Barrington's really entrepreneurial, so which is awesome. Everyone there, I think, is like a mini entrepreneur themselves. Everybody's working on their own accounts. Everyone is kind of doing their thing. So for how big they are, it's still very entrepreneurial with a lot of freedom and flexibility, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But I've also had the opportunity to work with some really great people in the offline world, where I've learned a lot about direct mail. I've learned a lot about TV, radio advertising, that, you think about things like direct mail and you think, oh, it's a postcard in the mail. It is what it is. But actually, there's so much more to it. We have a guy here, his name's Scott Kellerman, who runs direct mail. And he's taught me so much around paper stock, if it's glossy or if it's matte finishing, if it's in an envelope or not. All of these things will have influence on how the customer or prospect receives the piece of mail. And ultimately, if they choose to respond to it or not, to, go to the website or make a purchase or whatever that action is. So, a lot of changes in my day to day, but, a lot of opportunities to learn about these other channels that I really didn't know a whole lot about before.
Absolutely. And I mean, with the immense growth that we've been seeing in the world of e-commerce over the last decade, but especially in the last 15 or so months, I can imagine that your agency was sort of the missing piece of the puzzle for Barrington, so they could get on the digital bandwagon.
Yeah, so we brought in digital, which was fantastic, and then actually very recently, Barrington, we just acquired another digital agency called 5 Mil. It's run by a guy named Dan Soha, who's an incredible entrepreneur. He built this incredible agency, mostly on the back of paid search, where we're a little bit more social focused. And integrating with them has been great. Learning how their team operates, bringing some of our social selling to his clients, him bringing search to ours, along with direct mail into some of our clients. Kind of the ecosystem is really strong. I've learned at Barrington of what our offering is, where I used to be very skeptical of agencies who could do like multiple different things. I thought like specialty was the way to go. But seeing how we kind of work in our own verticals and we have experts in each of these categories, I can see the real benefit and understand why going to one where there's shared learnings could be much more beneficial.
No, absolutely. It's really nice to see when such an ideal pairing like the two is made, right? I mean, you talked about not having finance or HR, a lot of these business functions that, they're not only timely to create, but they're costly. There's a lot of risk associated. So, kudos to you guys. And I'm glad that it's been going so well. Now, I've heard you talk before about the fact that you were always really selective with the brands that you chose to work with, right? If you worked with 10 brands, you wanted a 9 out of 10 success hit or a success rate versus maybe a diamond in the rough here and there. So I would imagine with the brands that you've worked with, just to call out a few, we've already mentioned Movement. I know you've worked with like HelloFresh, Roman, Casper in the past. I would imagine that there's got to be some commonalities that help you identify what is a high performing brand. What does that look like? So help me understand, what are some of those commonalities that you could identify or have?
Yeah, so we got better over time. When we first started, we didn't really know what that was, but the more good companies we worked with, the more we started getting better about finding the commonalities that you mentioned. So Nick, my business partner, Nick, and I, we come from like a tech background, have worked with a lot of venture capitalists, angel investors. And I think we identify clients very similar to the way that they would identify an investment. And that comes down to one, unit economics. Like that's minimum. Like if they don't have good unit economics, they don't have the opportunity to have a good CAC to LTV ratio, which is customer acquisition cost to lifetime value. Like most of the businesses probably aren't going to work. So we look at that. We look at gross margins. We look at what their growth rates have been to date. More recently, I mean, in the last couple of years, I've become much more critical of the founder. I used to say like, oh, as long as, the product's good and the economics are good, we can probably make it work. I'm more on the side now, if they have a really great founder, the opportunity for them to adjust what they have to get to where they want to be is more likely. And so we look for really great people to work with. Over the years, like you mentioned, we've been really fortunate to work with a lot of companies and get a lot of inbound where we've been, able to be a little choosy. And getting to work with people who we really want to work with and gel with and can mesh with is so important, because I really believe that we've played a really critical role in a lot of companies' growth. And you want to be excited to get on the phone to talk to the client every week or twice a week, whatever the cadence is. You don't want to be dreading like, oh, I got to talk to so-and-so this week. We have a client right now who I've become very good friends with. It's called Oros Apparel. They're outdoor outerwear, and they just raised a big Series A, which is exciting. That's like the highlight of my week, getting to get on the phone and talk to those guys and help them solve business problems, learn from them, improve their business. And hopefully have them be, the next Movement or, Casper, or, take your pick of these successful brands of where I think they're going to end up.
So who do you think vetted these businesses harder, you guys or their venture capital firm?
Yeah, so I always say that we vet harder. And the reason that we vet harder is venture capital firms have a lot of money that they have to deploy and invest. We have very limited resources on our time, effort, resources. So I've always said we're pickier than venture capitalists, which is why we have a higher hit rate than they often do.
Oh my goodness. Well, Steve, especially in the past year, everyone has been talking about the online shopping experience. The offline portion seems to have kind of fallen out of the limelight a little bit. Most of us have seen Harry's Razors, Quip Toothbrush, and other DTC brands in a retail setting. Like I know I see them in Target, Walmart, etc. But what role does the offline experience play in a true omni-channel brand's buyer journey?
Yeah, so it's really critical, and that level of how critical it is, it happens at different stages of companies. So if you're just launching and you don't know if you have product market fit, you don't really know anything yet, it's often less important because you can do a lot of testing much more efficiently, lower cost online. So in the early stages, I always recommend start on Facebook, start on Google, get some traffic to your site, figure out if it's working or not. And then as your business progresses, there's going to be different opportunities to layer in offline opportunities. So for example, fairly early on for Movement, they were already high revenue. This was maybe 2016-ish, maybe early 2017. I don't really remember. It was a while ago. They got into Nordstrom, which is obviously not direct to consumer, but what it did is it gave them a really cool ability to position themselves next to other high-end brands. It allowed them to tell their potential D2C customers like, hey, if you want to see this in person before you buy it, we're in every Nordstrom. Just go to a Nordstrom, you can see it. And it also really gave them the ability to add what's called a store locator, which I'm sure you've seen on your site or on different e-commerce sites, to say we're in all these stores. So even if you don't have a Nordstrom near you, it adds so much credibility and trust to be like, oh, we're actually in all these physical retailers. We're not actually just a website, which increases conversion rate, increases lifetime value. It's very beneficial. Other companies have gone other ways with it. Brooklinen, who's an incredibly successful home goods company, they went the route of launching their own pop-up, which then became a permanent store, I think, in Brooklyn, which has been really successful for them. Other brands have gone the route of like Oros, who I mentioned. They did a temporary pop-up in Chicago in the winter, which was really cool. And in these physical retail environments, it gives you such an opportunity to tell your brand story and to do it effectively. As you can tell, I'm really excited about Oros. They're really successful, but in their pop-up, they actually had a liquid nitrogen tank, and they would let people put the coats on and they would spray them with liquid nitrogen on their back and prove that the coat actually worked. And I did this in the store. The coat was frozen solid, and it felt like there was a light breeze on my back. And I said, I absolutely have to buy this coat now because, Chicago wind is pretty brutal. And it's amazing. Like, that experience has made me such an advocate for the brand that online I absolutely never would have gotten to experience.
So at what point should a brand be considering engaging with different retail channels, right? Because my understanding is you need to have some level of track record of success and of prior sales in order to convince them to put you on their shelves. So I guess, do you have any I guess I don't know of tips or tricks in terms of at this point a brand should be considering it? Or I guess I'll diverge that to you.
I think it has to do with a lot to do with capital, because it's very expensive. So not only do you have to get in, but you have to supply a large amount of your product, and you have to tie it up in a place where you don't have access to it. When you're online, it often all sits in a warehouse in a third-party logistics facility where you can ship it anywhere in the world, which is great. But if you have a retailer like Nordstrom, they might say, we need 300 pieces for 200 stores. That's a lot of watches or product that get tied up all over the country. And, it might sell over, weeks or months. You don't get to turn this inventory as quickly. So I'd say once you're in a capital secure position where you can make some of these bets where you tie up money, you take bigger risk, I would say don't do it until you've proven that you're successful online. I'd say, make sure you're doing, strong revenue online where you're in a position to take a risk to go offline, because more times than not, it ends up being harder and more expensive than people think. So you want to make sure that, should it not work out, you still have your online business and everything's good. You don't want to split your eggs 50-50, split them, 90-10 when testing into offline.
Right. And understanding that, this question is totally dependent on the business, on, the kind of industry they're in. Is there like a revenue size at which point that's something they should begin thinking about? Or, I guess, is that not the right way to think about it?
It's hard to say. I used to say that for a D2C brand, 10 million is a milestone, 30 million is a milestone, 50 million is a milestone in annual revenue. It used to be fairly easy to get to 10 million. Now it's much, much harder. 30 was like a really solid business that I think is, can be profitable, sustainable. You're often, if you can get 10% margin to the bottom, you're making $3 million a year there. It's a pretty great business. Once you get to 50 million, that's like a whole other tier of complexity of getting to scale that big. I mean, you need to be international often. You need to have very wide product catalog. You need to have a very big team. So a lot of brands I see would kind of get to that 50 million mark and then they'd kind of fizzle off, or it would be very hard for them to get to the next level. I would say, if I had to put a number, I'd say you'd have to be at least 30 million in revenue before you start exploring it. And if it were me, I'd probably delay it as long as I could and would probably be closer to 50 or, beyond.
Try and maximize your odds of success.
Exactly.
Yep. Nope. Absolutely. Now, of the clients that you've worked with in the past, maybe some of the ones that you're working with now, when they come to work with you initially, right? Maybe they've started ideating on a D2C strategy. Maybe they come to you with no preconceived notions and they just ask for your help. But of the ones that do have something initially, what are some of the most common misconceptions that they make about what it takes to be successful in D2C?
Yeah, I see people all the time who come and they say, oh, I have this product and I have a Shopify store, and if we just run ads at it, it's going to work. Not true. Maybe it was true 6 years ago. You could make more mistakes. It was so much easier because of lower ad costs and things like that. But now, if they don't have their conversion rate optimization in place, if they don't have their email campaigns in place, if they don't have a plan to upsell and cross-sell that customer on future purchases, it's going to be really hard. Customer acquisition is getting more and more expensive every year. So if you're not able to make more from your customer over a longer period of time, it's going to be really hard to become a profitable, sustainable company.
It's interesting how often you hear that brands really don't put much thought into the post-purchase relationship with their customers, right? They're just on bringing new people into the funnel, and there's so much opportunity to re-engage because they've already bought your product. They already know what the value your brand offers is to them.
I'm a guy who's made a living on customer acquisition, but if you ask any of my clients, all I ever want to talk to them about is retention. Because retention is going to be so much more critical to the ultimate success of the business than customer acquisition. If you have good retention and you have a good repeat buy rate and you have customers coming back, you can then pay more to acquire them, which then accelerates your business. It's really about retention. Customer acquisition is important. Anyone can acquire a customer. Maybe you're paying too much, but if you make the if you make the lifetime value work, you have a really great, sustainable long-term business.
Is there like a percentage of, organizational revenue or, maybe another metric that you recommend your clients dedicate to their advertising spend, right? I mean, I've heard some people say as much as, 30 to 40%. Some people say less. I don't know. Is there a thought that you have or that you recommend mostly?
So it again depends on the stage of the company. I work with companies who are incredibly high growth, who are spending, 40 to 50% of their revenue and just trying to break even, skim along, grow the top line, with the goal of, improving retention and upselling and cross-selling customers later. I run into really great high growth companies who are around 30%, who say as long as we're achieving like a 3 times return on our ad spend, we're pretty happy. Maybe a little bit of money is getting to the bottom of the line, getting to the bottom line. But then you run into companies who are more mature, who have a more solid base. They're reselling their existing customers, and they say, now we're in the stage where we want to be very profitable and harvest profitability. And they say we want to be down in the 15 to 20% range. Obviously, the more you spend on customer acquisition, the more customers you're going to have. The less you spend, the less you're going to have, but the more profitable you'll be. So it really just depends on the stage of the company and what the ultimate goals are of the management team.
Right. And that's why they partner with people like you to try and find that equilibrium point, right?
Absolutely.
So, we talked about this a little bit tangentially, right? And I don't think we've fully addressed, correct me if I'm wrong, you mostly, at least in your previous life, maybe still work with businesses on, their Instagram, Facebook, I know maybe Pinterest a little bit, mostly social, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so cost per click, cost per impression, those prices have been increasing consistently, right? And will continue to do so as demand for these advertising platforms continues to grow. Now, do you ever see that growth normalizing, or how do you think this is going to affect future entrepreneurs and the way that they engage with these, social advertising platforms?
Yeah. So if you asked me 4 years ago, I would have said eventually you'll reach this normalization point where ad costs are pretty consistent. But looking at Google ads have been around for a long time. Facebook ads have been around for a long time now. And you don't see it flattening out. They're continually getting more expensive as, like I said, there's more competition, more advertisers, more people are realizing the efficiency there. So I think the platforms are doing a really good job of trying to create more places to serve impressions. So like when Facebook launched Instagram stories, that was a fantastic new placement that came out that was, highly effective early on because people weren't buying it yet. Google is always coming out with new placements. Gmail ads were fantastic early on. So even though the costs are going up, the platforms want to have more ads, more efficiency for you, the advertiser, which then you'll spend more if it's more efficient. So I think they're doing a good job of creating new placements. I'm sure when Facebook opens up WhatsApp, it's going to be, a major opportunity. Facebook owns Oculus, the VR platform. I'm sure one day there's going to be advertising opportunities there as well. And it'll just allow you to, just like when Facebook came out, the really savvy advertisers flocked there and took advantage of the opportunity. Now within the giant platforms, Facebook, Google, et cetera, you're finding these new placements where there's added beneficial pockets of efficiency.
So what I'm hearing, what my main takeaway from that is, as long as there's demand, if the prices get too high, there's going to be opportunities created that, maybe are more cost effective for some.
There's always more opportunity in everything, not just in advertising. If you think that this is the one little blip in space that advertising is efficient enough to start a business, you shouldn't be starting a business, because the odds of you timing it up that well are so incredibly against you that you need to see that there's always opportunity. It's just up to you to find it.
And as we're talking about, these channels like Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, maybe there are a few others that I'm not mentioning that you could speak to. How should a DTC brand determine which channels to prioritize or focus on, right? Because there's very different demographics of people that use Facebook versus Pinterest, et cetera.
Yeah. So when you're picking a channel, whether it's a digital channel or offline or whatever, I always try to prioritize most attributable to least attributable. And what I mean by that is understanding where your customers come from is probably one of the most important aspects of customer acquisition. And the reason that is so you know where to invest more. Google is highly attributable. And the reason is because people are searching for something specific. They type it in, they click through, they're probably willing to buy right away because they know they're searching for it. They want it right then. Facebook, on the other hand, is kind of the opposite. You're scrolling through your feed and you see, oh, wow, like, this item that I didn't know existed, but now I realize I want is great. And you click through and Facebook provides tracking to measure that performance. It's as you get higher in the funnel, maybe some of the platforms like Pinterest or Snapchat, they can't measure as effectively as Facebook and Google for various reasons. Or you get into, let's go all the way to the top and say you're buying billboards. How do you measure the effectiveness of a billboard? Yeah, there's ways, but it's less attributable than like a Facebook or a Google. So, without naming them in order, I always tell people to think through what is the most attributable channel that you can measure the performance effectively on.
Now, something that, I realize this may or may not happen in the future. I don't know if you can necessarily speak to it, but, there's been a lot of people talking about, potentially the breakup of big tech, right? Facebook has Instagram and WhatsApp and, all these different things that could be divested and become their own platforms. Now, do you have any thoughts or could you speak to how that might impact advertising on these channels, right? Because then you don't just have the one big Facebook entity overseeing the multiple platforms. So I guess I'll pause there. Love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's a good question. One that I hadn't really thought about, but just spitballing here, they could still partner with each other. They could still share data. It would be in their best interest too, even if they're standalone entities. My personal belief is it's not going to get broken up. I think that's a big step by the government to do that, and it's a big process.
The first attempt was already halted, so.
Exactly. And I also think that since those conversations have started, Facebook has done a really, really good job of cementing themselves as helping small business. And it's kind of political suicide for any politician to do anything that could hurt small business. So I think Facebook is incredibly smart in all aspects of their business. And by positioning themselves as being so critical to SMBs, which I fully believe that they are. I mean, I've watched it happen many times, and even for myself personally. I don't know if they're going to be able to be broken up because I don't know if somebody's going to want to stick their neck out on their political career to make that happen. I just don't see it happening. So I don't really worry about that.
Nope, fair enough. I mean, the last question that I have for you in this conversation. So I've heard a lot of similar KPIs thrown around in terms of what businesses selling online should focus about, right? Traffic, conversion rates. Are there any that are different that DTC should be focusing about in terms of like key performance indicators and how they're performing online?
I mean, different from traditional business, it's like you need to sell products and you need to sell it in a way that you have money left over. You can't spend more than you make. You can't lose money. Like, selling direct to consumer isn't really that different than selling anywhere else. It just happens to be the format of it. I like to say that the most important thing is your CAC to LTV ratio. I mentioned that before, cost to acquire a customer versus how much you make from them over the lifetime of them being a customer from you. As being a direct to consumer brand, you probably don't have as wide of a product selection as a retailer. So if you're Macy's, your Nordstrom, Sport Mart, like take your pick, you have thousands to millions of different products from all these different manufacturers that you're selling. So it's a lot easier to retain your customer because you have such a wide product catalog. But as a direct to consumer brand, and you start out, I don't know, let's just say watches, for example. You start by selling watches. Well, eventually you need something outside of watches to sell them because you've sold your whole base enough watches already. So if you're Nordstrom, well, okay, I've sold them all the watches that I can. I can sell them shoes. I can sell them shirts. I can sell them a million other things. But as a direct-to-consumer brand, making your retention work so you can maximize the value of each customer is just so critical. So I would say focusing on your lifetime value is probably the most critical metric.
No, and that's fair. And most of the people that I speak to mention the lifetime value, but they also really hype on, conversion and traffic. So obviously those are still important for DTC, but maybe it's fair to say that it's doubly important to focus on the lifetime value component, right?
I would say it's 10 times as important.
There we go.
And again, I'm a guy who acquires customers for a living. The retention is just so much more important.
Social proof is real, man.
100%.
Yeah. Well, Steve, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. Now, where can our listeners get in touch with you and the team at Barrington?
Yeah. So I love talking to entrepreneurs, early stage, late stage, wherever. I'm always happy to have an intro conversation. So one, if you want to get to me directly, you can go to LinkedIn, just search for Steve Dinelli. I think I'm the only one. You'll find me. You can also go to barringtonmediagroup.com. There's a contact form there. Just mention the podcast and somebody will forward it over to me and I'll reach out. But there's nothing I love more than talking about these things and trying to problem solve, especially early stage companies. So reach out. I'd be happy to have an intro conversation if anyone's looking for help or wants an outside opinion or, wants to talk about blackcurrant tea.
Or VR.
That's something you and I touched on, as we both have found a lot of fun on our Oculuses.
Yeah, this is not an ad for the Oculus Quest 2, but if you don't have one and you like video games, it's worth the buy.
It's a great direct-to-consumer brand.
Exactly. Well, Steve, like I said, it's been great speaking with you. Really, really appreciate the time today. And hopefully we can have you on for future conversations.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks again for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. That's it for this episode of E-commerce with Coffee, powered by Amber Engine. If you haven't gotten your fix yet, be sure to get more e-commerce brand secrets on our website at amberengine.com. And don't forget to subscribe for more episodes.